So I need to say thank you all for coming along tonight. I can't wait to hear what Helen Parr's got to say about bats. It seems like a very popular topic. But before I pass over to Helen, I would just like to say a few words about my project. I work for Devon Wildlife Trust on a project called Conservation Communities. Some of you will have heard me say these things several times, but I'm very conscious that there's some new people that haven't been on one of my talks already. And so I'd just like to introduce the project to you. It's a project run by Devon Wildlife Trust and it's funded by the Heritage Lottery. And they have given us some funding until December 2022 to work with 11 parishes in a very specific area of Devon, from Great Torrington to Hatherley. So for those of you that don't know that area, it's West Devon and Torridge areas. And we're to work with these parishes to try and generate some wildlife records to be sent into the Devon Biodiversity Records Centre. And the reason why they want to try and get some records into the Devon Biodiversity Records Centre is because they don't actually have a great deal of records generated by sightings on the ground. They can have a guess at what might live here from aerial photographs and knowledge of habitats, but they don't necessarily have the actual recordings of the different species. So we're reaching out to these communities to ask people to help us and to make records. So we're really keen that people, after listening to our talks, have a go at making a record. It doesn't take very long to submit a record. And if you go onto the Devon Biodiversity Records Centre's website, you will see that their page comes up with these boxes, these orangey yellow boxes down the side. And the third one down is a link to how to make a wildlife record. And you will get asked a few questions about who you are, where you saw the species that you want to record. And if you don't know where you are exactly, there's a map on the website that will help you get an exact location. And it'll ask you the date when you saw it. Nothing too complex. If you don't know the exact species, for example, if after tonight's talk you happen to spot a bat, you can just record bat on there, and that's really useful for the Record Centre. If you have a bat detector or you're able to identify it in more detail, that's also brilliant. But interestingly enough, when I started this project, they said to me, we don't even have records of house sparrows, which most people will be able to recognise from their gardens. So it'd be fantastic if you could record even the common species that you think might not need recording, maybe a frog or a hedgehog or a flower that you particularly like seeing. Any record is a good record for the Wildlife Trust and the Records Centre. So even if it's something that you think is relatively common, please do take a few minutes to submit a record for us. That would be fantastic. So if you want to know a little bit more about my project, the Conservation Communities Project, you can go onto the Devon Wildlife Trust website. As they're hosts of the project, all my information about my project is on there, and it tells you how you can get involved. If you happen to be in these 11 parishes, do get in touch and we can perhaps talk about how we can help you improve the biodiversity or have a talk in your parish. It tells you all the information about how to find our previous talks that we've done. We've done a whole suite of talks over the winter and while we've been in lockdown. Talks on hedgehogs, tracks and signs, various different topics that you might be interested in listening to. And then it tells you how to put a wildlife sighting in if you've forgotten all the different links to the Devon Biodiversity Records Centre. And it also shows you how you can borrow one of our trail cameras. So if anyone's interested from those 11 parishes in borrowing our trail camera, you can put it up in your garden or on some private land, and you can use that to record some of the wildlife that's there. And because you'll have actual evidence, there won't be any question about which species it is. You can just add the pictures onto your records and it can go straight through as a verified record. Sometimes people put records in and we have to spend a bit of time verifying those. Obviously, we have to make sure that all records are genuine. So it does take a little bit of time for the records to show up on our database once people have submitted them. So that's a little bit about my project. I would like to now pass over to Helen. And thank you very much, Helen, for coming this evening.
Hello, everyone. My name's Helen Parr. And I've recently finished working on a wildlife trust project called the Devon Greater Horseshoe Bat project. And hopefully some of you might have heard about it because it was a 5-year project and I was the community engagement officer on that project. And we worked across different bits of Devon, when we focused on the areas where the maternity roosts are of greater horseshoe bats. So I will add in a little bit about greater horseshoes in this talk, but I've been asked to talk about bats and then gardening, so I'm going to sort of split it into 3 bits really. The first will be a bit about global bat stuff, putting it in context, a bit about UK bats, and then things that we can all do if we want to help bats in our garden. So let's crack on. I hope that's moved on okay. So there are actually over 1,300 species of bats in the world, which when you know that there are only 5,000 mammal species, that's a pretty large number, a proportion are bats. They're only outnumbered as a group of mammals by rodents, in fact. So about 1,000 of these species, though, out of 1,300, are considered to be at-risk species, which is quite worrying. Now, most bats, as people probably know, have at least one thing in common, even though there's lots of different species. They are nocturnal. And one good reason for being a nocturnal animal is to avoid predators. If you're out in the dark, you're much less likely to be predated on. You may be, but it's less likely. And then it also avoids competition for food resources with birds and other mammals that are out in the daytime. So different species of bats feed on different types of food. So you get your fruit bats, you've got some that eat insects, some actually eat fish by grabbing them out of the water, some eat lizards, and some take nectar. And there are actually 3 species of bat which do feed on blood. So when I used to go into schools and people were scared about vampire bats, I did say there are only 3 species out of 1,300 that feed on blood, and it's not human blood, so nothing to worry about there. And they all live in South America as well. So that's a relief. And so bats have evolved sort of over millions of years. I mean, the oldest bat skeleton is something like 60 million years old. So they were around at the time of the dinosaurs, and they've all evolved in different ways, depending on what they eat, where they're feeding. So if they're nectar feeders, they would have quite a long tongue. And if they're the fishing type of bats, they have larger feet. I'm just going to show you not all 1,300 bat species, but just a few little pics. I've got a few nice ones that a colleague on the bat project went on a trip to Africa, and he took some amazing pictures. So some of them are his pictures. And this is called a Wahlberg's Epaulette fruit bat from Africa. These fruit bats tend to be the largest bats, are generally found in the tropics. So sort of from Africa across the east to the Pacific Islands, and then in Australia as well. And they tend to have really large eyes to help them see well in the dark. And they don't generally use echolocation, which is what most bat species use. I'll talk about that in a minute. So this is the largest bats in the world. It's a type of flying fox, and has a wingspan of up to 1.7 meters. It's pretty huge. And here's the smallest. This is called Kitty's hog-nosed bat, or the bumblebee bat. And as you can see, it's absolutely tiny. It weighs only about 2 grams. This one's called the heart-nosed bat. It's got this amazing kind of heart-shaped nose piece, and this is a bat from Tanzania. This is a Mauritian Tomb Bat. So as you're starting to see, they come in all shapes and sizes, and they all look quite different. But as we said, a large proportion of the world's bats are at threat of extinction, which is crazy considering the benefits they serve to the ecosystem. So the bats that eat insects provide natural pest control. So this is one of the benefits of bats. Even tiny pipistrelle bats in the UK can eat up to 3,000 midges in one night. Other bats help with spreading seed, just like birds do. One of my favourites is this one. This is the Tequila Bat. And so this little bat pollinates tequila cacti. And without it, we wouldn't have tequila. So if you enjoy a little glass of tequila, then you've got this little bat to thank for that. And they're quite endangered, actually, that particular bat. There are some plant species that only flower at night, so bats are attracted to them and pollinate them, and so they wouldn't be able to be pollinated without the bats. And other things like crops like avocados, peaches, mangoes all rely on bat pollination. This rather alarming looking bat is called Sebas short-tailed fruit bat, weighs only about 19 grams, but is absolutely amazing at dispersing seeds. It's one of the commonest bats in Latin America and eats fruits containing loads and loads of tiny seeds. So one of these bats can eat about 60,000 seeds in one night. And as there are about 400 bats in a colony generally, someone's worked out that a group of bats, that many bats in 1 year, could disperse about 9 billion seeds around the place in their droppings. And so even if only a 0.1% of those seeds germinated, you'd still get potentially 9 million new seedlings. So you can start to see the benefits that they bring. So bats are the only true flying mammals. And they're very closely related to humans, so they do actually have a skeleton that is very similar to ours, with all the same bones. And you can see when you look at the bone structure on this, this is actually a greater horseshoe bat wing there on the left, and you can see that one of the main differences with our bone structure between them and humans is the very, very long fingers, which allow, and they bend in the same places as our fingers. And the tiny little hook at the top there is like a little claw. It's a thumb, but it's become a small little claw. And then the other 4 long bones of the 4 fingers. And there's this sort of stretchy wing membrane that stretches all around between them. The greater horseshoe bats are found in the UK. One of the larger bats that we have around a 40-centimetre wingspan, nothing like as big as the flying fox. They're really adapted for flying in tight places. And you can see from the photo on the right there, they can sort of zoom, bring their wings in and out and flex them, and that bat's heading for a moth in the picture there. So they're pretty agile. So echolocation is the method that most bat species use for getting around, or many bat species. So what they do is emit high-pitched sounds. So many bats emit this through their mouth, but some bats, like the horseshoe bats, emit this through their nose, and that's why they've got these unusual looking nose shapes. And they emit those high-pitched calls, which the sound waves go out and they bounce off whatever they touch, so a tree or a hedge or a person or some prey, and they can build up a picture in their mind in the dark of exactly where they're flying, what they're catching. And this is when we record bat sounds, because we can't really hear them with our human ears, they're much higher than that. They all tend to locate at slightly different frequencies, but this is a sonogram showing the sound calls. The time is along the bottom in seconds, and the up the side is hertz, so in kilohertz. And we know that greater horseshoe bats echolocate at 80 kilohertz. So when we see a pattern like this around that frequency, we know this detector, whatever's being used here to pick up the sound and record it, we know that's a greater horseshoe bat. So it helps us to identify the different bats. Bats aren't blind, by the way, in case anyone thinks they are. They can see pretty much as well as humans. It's just that if you're standing out in the pitch, if you're a human out in the dark, it doesn't matter how good your eyesight is, you can't really see. So bats have evolved this very clever way of seeing in the dark. So this, this is an example of a bat. It's called a yellow-winged bat, not a UK bat, that calls through its nose. And so the nose leaf, the big bit on its face, front of its face there, is used to send out the sound, and it's quite a flexible piece, so they can direct it to where they want. They can move it independently of the rest of their head. So that's a bit of a whistle-stop tour of the world and some of the bats and the huge variety. that there are. And then these are just a few of the UK bats. So we've got 18 species of bat in the UK, all well adapted to our climate. In the tropics, bats tend to be active all year round because it's nice and warm and the temperatures pretty much, can be the same all the time, pretty similar. But in temperate areas, bats hibernate in the winter to save energy when there's not much food available. It wouldn't be worth them using all their energy to hunt throughout the winter, although they do come in and out in the winter, but generally they would use up too much energy for the amount of food that they could catch. And we're really lucky in Devon because I think we're so far south in the UK, our climate is, fairly mild. We have all but 2 of the UK's bats, including some of the rarer bats, such as a Barbastelle bat, which is on the top left there, that's a woodland bat. There's also the things like Beckstein's bats, grey long-eared and horseshoe bats, all quite rare and at risk. The bottom left is the Barbastelle bat, and the top left bat there is a Dorbenton's bat. So if you've ever seen a bat hunting over water and feeding on insects over water body, that would probably most likely be a Dorbenton's bat. And on the right is the most common bat that we have in the UK, the little pipistrelle, common pipistrelle this is. And if you sit out in your garden in the evenings, and as it starts to get dark and you start to see little bats flitting about, zooming around the garden, that's most likely a pipistrelle bat trying to catch some midges. So back to, and also, why do we care about bats? Why do they matter? Well, as I've already said, they eat lots of insects, so they're a really good pest control measure for agriculture. And someone's calculated that in the US, for example, that natural pest control is worth over $22 billion a year, which is a pretty impressive amount. And I've mentioned those other points there. So here in the UK, well, and globally, but if we talk about the UK, insect numbers have pretty much plummeted over the last few decades, and with it, so have the bats. So greater horseshoe bats, for example, have, and hence why we had a project to help them, have declined by about 90% in the last 100 years, which is a huge number. And so it's very simple why this is. Less habitats equals less insects, which in turn equals less bats and other wildlife, of course. And so the main causes of this are, unfortunately, from humans. Development obviously covers up and is using up existing wild areas. Also, the intensification of agriculture over the decades. So making fields much bigger to make them easier to farm, and the enormous use of pesticides over the last few decades has all taken its toll on our insect numbers and hence our bat populations. So in terms of habitats that and places that things that bats need, they need somewhere to live, just like us. So that might be old buildings, particularly in the summer for when the bats are breeding and they want to have their young in a warm, cozy place. So that might be the roof of a barn. It might be the roof of your house, nice and warm. Some bats have winter hibernation spots in caves and mostly in caves or maybe mines or man-made places. They might also have a summer roost there, but they'd move to a warmer part near the entrance. And trees are also really great place for bats. I mean, they can even roost under like bits of ivy and behind tiny bits of broken bark. And there's just a few other places that a bat will find to live, any little tiny space. The bats, most bats in the UK can crawl into tiny spaces. The horseshoe bats need to fly in, so they need a slightly bigger hole, and they will roost together in large numbers, so they need a bit more space. They need great habitats, so this is what we need if we want good wildlife. Woodlands are great for woodland bats as well as many insects, and then other bats will use the woods, the edge of the woods, as a navigating when they're echolocating at night. Also the same goes for hedges. They're like the highways for bats around Devon. And we're lucky in Devon, we know we all appreciate our amazing Devon hedges, but we've still lost about half of all the hedges, the hedges that we did have, perhaps over the last few decades. So a lot of larger fields, small fields, sorry, have been made bigger just by removing the odd bit of hedgerow here and there, and sometimes along roads where fences are being put in. I've been noticing that recently. Quite a lot of older hedges have just been ripped out, which is a shame. Meadows are fantastic for insects, and we've lost, sadly, 98% of our wildflower meadows over the last few decades. So it's only 2% of the original wildflower meadows left. So, this all sounds a bit doom and gloom, and it is, but that, actual people's gardens and spaces in towns and villages and cities can actually be really crucial for wildlife now, because if you add up all the gardens across Britain and put them to, and add up the land area, that's a really huge resource that could be really good for wildlife. Then this is just a couple of slides on greater horseshoe bats, because I know a bit more about them. And this shows its incredible nose leaf, this huge piece on its face, and the reason it's called a horseshoe bat is that horseshoe shape at the bottom there, and it's an amazing thing when you see it close up. And this is the bit it uses to emit its echolocating sounds and to flexibly move it around so that it can sort of home in on what's going on around it. And it's a fantastic predator. I think I said all the bats in the UK. If I didn't say, they all eat insects, just insects, and they've got these tiny sharp teeth. There's a skull picture there, and this, I love this image of this bat. So what greater horseshoes do is hang upside down on a tree, a branch of a tree, perhaps a tree in a hedgerow or something like that, a tall tree that's left along a hedgerow. And as they echolocate and they hear something, or they can work out something's nearby, they'll then zoom down and scoop it up in their wing. You can see that poor moth there being caught up in the wing and heading for the sharp teeth of the bat there. Then they'll fly back, perch again, hanging upside down, and they will dismember the moth and chuck all the crunchy bits on the floor. They don't want to eat the wings and all those bits. They want the nice, juicy, sort of protein-rich body inside. And they will eat things, moths, they'll eat beetles. Dung beetles are a really good prey item. They'll eat crane flies and little wasps and cockchafer beetles like that one in the top left there. So all these different prey are available at different times throughout the year in different quantities. So if you start losing any of those, there's a gap in the diet potentially for the bats, or perhaps for the young bats when they're coming out of their roosts around September time. So bats are predators, but they also are prey, even though they're out in the dark when you think they'd be safe. But the main predators and problems for bats would be something like a sparrowhawk, barn owls, and also the worst sort of predators of bats is unfortunately are our pet cats. They lie in wait sort of, and the bats come out at the same sort of time each night, and they can sort of slash away. And people that look after injured bats, that's the main sort of reason that they get an injured bat, is it's been attacked by a cat. So some of the things that this is a really nice example of something that's been done to help bats with a community in Chudley, which we were working with on the project, and it became a bat-friendly community through all the great work they did to help the bats. So this is quite near a bat roost, a maternity roost of greater horseshoe bats, and they created in fact a horseshoe-shaped garden in a sort of bat-friendly garden on a previously just a mown sort of little grassy area of the town, and planted lots of attractive pollinator plants. And they've got a sign up saying what they've planted, so if people come and see it, they could go and do that in their own garden. So that's a really fantastic way of helping the bats. And a garden that's good for bats, or some land that's managed for bats, will be good for other wildlife too. Small gardens can connect and provide a really good wildlife corridor for lots of species, such as hedgehogs. You've got things, butterflies, moths, and other insects. And the cockchafer beetle, again, it's one of my favorites. It's there on the top left picture. I just think they're amazing little creatures. They're quite a large beetle, if you've ever seen them. So going on to gardens and things that people can do in their own gardens. The main thing is to have as much variety as you can of different size and shape of flowers to attract insects, because different insects are sort of designed to, they've got different sized tongues for different plants, and they're attracted to different sort of plants. So if you just have one type of plant, you'll only get a limited number of insects using them. Unfortunately, at the bottom there you can see the things like bedding plants. They do look nice, but the way that they're bred are things like some double-headed plants like petunias and some geraniums. They look pretty, but they don't produce any or hardly any nectar or pollen, so they're not actually good for wildlife. So it's fine to have them, but they just won't attract that much wildlife. So it's good to have a mixture of all the other things. Generally, if you buy something that's native to the UK, that's going to be a good thing to plant to attract our native insects. So yeah, different sort of flower beds, herb gardens, hanging baskets, a rockery, just all sorts of different things that are going to be good. And night flowering species such as buddleia and things like evening primroses are really good for moths. So grass and mowing. If you like to have a big grassy lawn that's mown all the time, that's fine. That's your choice, but it's not going to be very good for wildlife. So we are trying to sort of encourage people to, if not make the whole thing into a wildflower meadow, at least maybe set aside a corner or some edges or some troughs or planters or even a wheelbarrow like in the picture here, for wildflowers to flourish and not be mown, because this is probably one of the best things that you can do to help wildlife in your garden. And also, if pesticide use in garden is still quite common, most people have things that they've picked up in the garden centre and not really realise how toxic they are to other animals in the garden. So just stopping using any sort of garden chemicals will have a big difference as well. And we always try to remember that a weed is only a plant in the wrong place, isn't it? They're all good for wildlife. So one thing you can do is to make your garden good for bug insects is make a bug hotel. We've got some rather elaborate ones here on the right, which have been created. Well, that one using pallets with natural things like terracotta pots and bamboo canes and grass and bits and tiles shoved in there to, and there's some, if you drill holes into bits of wood, or if you have bricks with holes in, that's all fantastic for different insects to hide away in. And you don't have, if you're not creative like me, you could just pile up a load of twigs in the corner of your garden, and that will be a good place for different wildlife to shelter. You've got things like a slow worm there, and on the top left, we always get them in our sort of compost bin. So even having your own compost is good. You can make your compost out of your waste sort of peelings, but also help wildlife. If you're really creative, then how about making a bug bench? So you've got a bench somewhere nice to sit, and then underneath is lots of accommodation for your local insects. So it's a sort of win-win situation. Having water in your garden is one of the best things you can do for wildlife, because obviously everything needs water. If you do have a pond, large or small, like in these photos, just don't stock it with fish, because they tend to just sort of eat all the other wildlife in it. But by providing some water in your garden, well, it's nice for you to look at, that you're providing a drink for insects or birds and mammals. And it's good if you have different areas of depth, so just some shallow areas and some deep areas in it as well. So even if you've only got a small garden, a yard or a sort of balcony, you can still do some of this sort of vertical planting. I like these, there's some really good ideas here, using some pallets or some shelving or trellis to plant different things, and you can make some of these things edible, so they're nice for you as well as for the local insects. tomatoes and strawberries and perhaps herbs or salad things in troughs. So there's no excuse that everybody can do something, however big or small. Again, if you're handy with a saw or nails, or buy a kit, you could perhaps consider putting up some bird boxes, maybe a bat box. In the middle here, I like this sort of little shelter thing with a green roof on it. That's nice. And there's hundreds of bird feeders you can get for your garden, but I quite like this homemade one on the right there. On our bat project, the devonbatproject.org website is still, the project's not live anymore, but all the information's still on our website. So if you're interested, there's lots of more information about greater horseshoe bats, obviously, on that website. Also in the download section, there's a booklet which is all about bat-friendly gardening. So it does give some nice suggestions of things that you could plant in your garden specifically that would attract night pollinators. There's just I won't go all through those, but you're getting the message now, hopefully. These sort of insect-friendly, lovely native meadow flowers are all going to be really good for attracting insects and consequently bats to your garden. So the Wildlife Trust, Devon Wildlife Trust has got an Action for Insects campaign. So if you really want to take action and get involved in that, you can sign up, and you can find that on the Devon Wildlife Trust website. You can sign up to take action. For instance, you get regular sort of information about things you can do and how the campaign is going, and also gives you information about pesticide reduction, and you get a download for your for individuals or for community groups with lots of information of things that you can do. And also at the bottom there, just if you're in the garden centre, keep a lookout for the Perfect for Pollinators logo, because that, you know, straight away that's a Royal Horticultural Society initiative. You know it's going to be good for insects if it's got that symbol on the label. And the Wild About Gardens is a wildlife trust sort of nationally. That's a website dedicated to well, wild gardens. So thank you for listening. I hope that's given you some inspiration. There can be a bit of a bleak picture sometimes for wildlife at the moment, but if we all go out and do one thing after today, that, you know, that's 50 gardens that will be looking better for wildlife. Thanks very much and happy gardening.
Thank you, Helen. That was great. So if anyone's got questions, or if you could put them in the chat, that's the little speech bubble along the bottom of your screen, and we'll have a look at some of the questions that people have put up there. I loved your thing about the tequila. That's such a good fact, isn't it? Brilliant. And there's some amazing photos. I noticed people put in the chat, wow, what great photos. You can tell you've you know, you've accumulated some great shots over the time of your bat project.
Yeah, so when we started, we didn't have anything.
Yeah.
We've got, with all the, because the project was there's 18 partners on the project, so including the sort of Bat Conservation Trust and Devon Bat Group, and we were funded by the lottery fund. So we quickly, got lots of amazing resources, and a lot of that's information, you know, it's all on the website. So yeah, do take a look and see. Oh, and there's videos as well. We've got a live camera. I think they're going to keep it going on the Devon Bat Project website. That's inside one of the maternity roosts, and from about June, July onwards through to September, you can see like hundreds of bats in the roost. Mostly females are all having their young, so it's quite fun to see that.
Brilliant. Right, so we've got a question here about someone's got a paddock that had horses in, no longer has horses, and they'd like to make it into a wildflower meadow, and they're asking, is it just a case of scattering the seed, or do they need to cover it with soil and specific instructions?
I think there's different ways of creating meadows. So yeah, the basic thing would be get a load of seed and scatter it about and hope the best. It depends. If for any grass that's been improved, so if it's quite vigorous, like agricultural type grass or maybe lawn grass, that what will happen is it will be so sort of competitive, it will suppress any of the little wildflowers they're trying to get through, because they like really poor soil. So that in that case, like the most intensive way of doing it is kind of ripping off all the turf and doing it that way, but or you can scrape it a bit to make some bare patches. One nice thing you could do is instead of thinking, oh, I've got this huge area, it's going to cost me a fortune to seed it, you could actually do patches around the whole of your garden or field, and then you can scarify and rake it and get all the, you know, the vigorous grass off a bit, scatter your seed, and then the next year after it's flowered and set seed, you kind of cut it in the July or something and rake the arisings on the areas around it, and that kind of naturally expands it, and over a few years you could then make the whole thing kind of come together as one meadow.
There's some great information on the More Meadows forum, so it's really worth researching on More Meadows. They have loads of brilliant advice about this sort of thing, and they've got some talks. They've had some talks on there recently, which I'm sure there'll be recordings of on the More Meadows site, where they've taught people how to start from scratch and how to go about it. And their message is always just take it one step at a time. You know, don't expect to produce this overnight. It takes time and effort, but it's really worth it, and it has a very high reward value once it starts to work.
And it's good to have a mixture of annuals and perennial wildflowers, because the annuals are the showy, colourful ones that we all like, but then you have to sow them every year, and the perennial grasses might not be as colourful, but and the flowers not as colourful, but they will come back year after year. So it's really good to have a mixture. And there's a couple of quite nice, the Goran Farm is one in East Devon, and there's another one that's a lot, I can't remember, but if you look for local seed suppliers, you know it's come from fairly locally, and you know it should do well in your garden. The thing about randomly ordering it off the website is you don't know really where it's come from, and it may just not do very well in your particular soils, and those suppliers are really good at, they help advise you and look at your soil type and which is the best thing to put on your soil and so on, or you can just go and, if you just for your garden, go to the garden centre and get a packet of wildflower seeds.
Yeah, it's really important, isn't it, to try and get British wildflowers. Locally sourced ones really help, I think. You get more success rate. So we've got another question here, Helen, that says, can you advise about lights and the effects on bats? Lots of people have lights in the village, don't they? Don't know whether to turn them off or on.
Yeah, so the ideal scenario for any bat would be no light at all. So it's been shown in many studies, and some of the studies that were going on alongside our project, the Bat project, that lighting has a detrimental effect on bats' use of that area. I mean, I know people may have seen little pipistrelle bats flocking to a street light to get the insects around it, but they're more doing that because there's some food there. They're not like attracted to the light or anything. So one thing is, if you've got security lights that come on and off all night, you know, when the minute anything goes by, they're not great for bats. So the best thing you can do is just minimize the lights in and around your sort of garden. And some villages have even trialed having whole nights with the street lights off or not on all night. I think in our village in South Devon, I think the street lights all go off about 11 and then they come on again in the morning. So there's no need to have that light if at night, really. And there's some people have concerns about safety and lighting, but again, it's been shown that it's a perception rather than actual risk, because when you've got lights shining on and you're walking along the path, you can't actually see beyond that because you're sort of blinded by the lights and your eyes haven't become accustomed to the dark. So it's an interesting, and if you've got lights that are maybe got a cover on, so the light is pointing down rather than just splaying up into the sky, that's good as well.
Oh, thank you. Someone's asking if you can recommend a bat detector.
Yeah, so there are different types of detector. The ones that we use on the project, and we got these from NHBS, which is a supplier of sort of wildlife equipment, and they're based in Totnes. They do something called a magenta handheld bat detector, and that's the magenta 6 was the one we used. They cost about £80. and they have a dial, so you can set the dial to different frequencies and then listen to the bats. It doesn't tell you what the bat is, but if one's echolocating and it's 80 kilohertz, you could work out it's a greater horseshoe. And over time and doing it, it takes a long time. You can start to work out which is which, because we do only have this sort of 16 bats that you would find in Devon, so you can start to work it out. And then you get more expensive ones. There's one called the Echometer Touch. I don't know if anyone's got one of those, but it's, when it came out a few years ago, it was £400, and now they're 200. But it's a small that big detector that you plug it into a phone, a smartphone, or an iPad or something, and you can be out and about and you can record all the sounds, and it also tries to identify the bats that you hear as well. So that's a really nice piece of kit. But yeah, really you just got to sort of look around, see, depends what your budget is really. And then the other type of detector is a static detector. So this doesn't allow you to listen to bats, but it's what we used on the project to record bat activity. And if anyone took part in our Devon Bat Survey, which was a big citizen science project across Devon, where you could borrow kit, put it in your garden for 3 nights, and then send us the SD card, which recorded all the sounds. That's what we used, a static detector for those. But you're looking at, well, the ones we use cost about £1,200, but there are some cheaper ones in the sort of 200 to 600 range. But then you've got to have the knowledge to analyze the data, and it all becomes quite complicated then.
Thanks, Helen. There's a couple of questions about bat boxes. Where's the best place to put them?
I can see someone showing us their Echometer Touch. Excellent. Yes, Sandra there. That's what they look like. Yeah, they're tiny. And they used to be black when they first made them, which was really impractical, but I'm glad that they now make them in a red colour, because you're less likely to use it when you're out at night. What was that, the next thing?
Yeah, so people are asking questions about bat boxes. Are they beneficial? Where's the best place to put them? Is there one type that's better than another?
There are so many types. I wouldn't have a particular preference. The only thing I'd say about bat boxes, I think the best thing you can do to help bats is just to make your garden really good for insects, because the bats will tend to find somewhere to roost. But it can be fun to put up a box. They're quite fussy though, so if you put up a bat box, you may put like 3 around one big tree, not north facing generally, but facing the other directions, and you may find none of them get occupied. So I think they're less likely to get occupied than bird boxes. And also, because bats are a protected species, you're not allowed to look in it, because that would be counted as disturbing a bat roost, which is illegal. So you could look for evidence where if there was scratching or droppings below, but I think you can get so many different types now, sort of the standard wooden type ones. I think the Devon Wildlife Trust has something on one of them on the website, how to make a bat box, and Devon Bat Group, if you look at their website, I think they have a one as well if you can make yourself. But yeah, my preference is to get the insects first, not the bat box. If there's nothing for them to eat, they're not really going to come and use it.
Yeah, it's all about those insects, isn't it? In this country, we need to build up our insect levels.
Yeah, they're the basic building blocks of everything else. So that's why the Action for Insects campaign is so vital. And they might not be as exciting or attractive looking as sort of cuddly things further up the food chain, but without them, we don't really have anything else. So.
Yeah, someone's asking if bats would prey on bees and wasps.
I don't know about bees, but I know that they do feed on these sort of I can't remember the name of them, but a type of woodland wasp, not our average sort of stripy wasp. I don't know, but I think they do. Yeah, they do.
Got some nice comments, Helen, saying that the Greater Horseshoe Bat project was brilliant. And
it was brilliant. Yeah. If you look on our Devon Bat project website, there's like an end of project page, and it's got some really nice like infographics and summaries of like an online book of what we achieved. So yeah, we really want people to keep using the downloads and the resources. There's sort of educational stuff for anyone that works with children. There's farming, there's management guides for people who want to know about how to make orchards or hedges or things good for bats. I noticed that somebody said, John has said, that even the good for pollinated plants can have pesticides on them. So organic is good. Yeah, I didn't know that.
Oh, there's a question about bats coming into your house. People often find that in the summer, don't they?
Yeah. If a bat comes in your house, it's going to be a lot more scared than you, is the first thing. What you can do then is open the windows, turn off the lights, and it will find its way back out again. Don't make a big fuss and terrify it.
So we've got a question here saying someone would like to replace their lawn with wildflower seeds, but can they still walk on it? They'd feel bad about squashing the wildflowers and the insects.
No, I would. I mean, you could always have a little path through it. You know, and if you look at woodlands or natural places, you know, there's paths that go through, and yeah, I think sometimes sort of standing on things like that I don't think it makes any difference. It could probably make them stronger in some cases. They'd just be a bit lower to the ground. So I would perhaps just mow a little path around or use the same path, and then it would get flat and the rest of it would be fine. But that sounds really good. Good idea.
Yeah, there's some lovely comments here. There's another one about someone moving into a new house and they've got a little bit of woodland, so they can't wait to make it a wildlife haven.
Oh, brilliant.
Yeah,
it's so easy to do. Literally, like, I think we've all probably, chucked chemicals on our garden just because that's what you do and that's what you think you're supposed to do. And things like slug pellets, they can really poison hedgehogs, and hedgehogs love to eat slugs. So let's just let the hedgehogs do their thing and let the whole, there are predators even for pests on your plants, aphids and things. If you just leave it, the whole thing will be in balance after maybe not in the first year, but just sort of let it go and see what happens.
So Helen, there's a really good question here asking about, when you've got a bat detector and you set the dial for different frequencies, do you have a recommendation for a book or some information to go with that so you can start learning which bats to set for different frequencies?
There is a really good book, but I can't remember the name of it, a bat identification book, but I don't know, do you send out a follow-up email at all?
Yes, I can send that out in the follow-up email with the recording.
I'll try and get hold of it, because it's the book for sort of call identification. I mean, when you buy them, you usually get a little list of the frequencies and the bats, but also on our website there is a section where you can listen to some bat sounds. For example, like the lowest frequency bat is a noctule at 20 kilohertz, and once you've heard it, you definitely would sort of remember it. And the highest is a lesser horseshoe bat at 120, and that just sounds like a kind of alien spaceship noise. It's bizarre. So you get your ear in, and you get to know them.
Someone's just put the FSC guide is a fold-out chart and is excellent. I've used that loads, and it's got all the frequencies on there, and it's just all the pictures, and that's really useful.
That is a brilliant guide. So FSC is the Field Studies Council. If you look, you can get these guides to all sorts of wildlife. Actually, they're about £3 to £4 each. £4, I think they are. Some come in packs, and they've got tons of information, like almost as much as in a book, of all the different bats and where you might see them. So like I said about a Dorbenton's bat that will fly over water, shows like the different flight sort of patterns that different bats have, and then you can start to see those then just before it gets dark, and start to think, oh, that's quite a big bat, or it's sweeping up and diving down, and maybe it's this or maybe it's that. So it's good, and it's simple. You don't have to be an expert.
So thanks a lot, Helen. That's been amazing tonight. I've learned loads. Not just the tequila, but I've learned lots of things.
You can actually buy like tequila, bat-friendly tequila they started making, because I think they've tried to use other methods to, like, I can't remember, I don't know all the technical things, but cloning or something to propagate the cacti, but it doesn't involve the bats, and so they're dying out. So yeah, look for tequila, bat-friendly tequila if you do buy any.
Thank you everyone for coming this evening, and hopefully we'll see you all at our future talks. Thanks very much.